Well, one of the key issues that all businesses face is the challenge of getting growth, sustainable growth in markets which are much more competitive, in markets which in the West are declining, and of course we now need to seek growth in the emerging markets. And one of the challenges that the CFO faces is, on the one hand, making sure that the investment decisions that are made are robust, that the risk profile of the business, which naturally changes as a result of moving away from your home markets into more international markets, means that you take on a higher level of risk, and the board and the executive of the companies need to be well guided to make sure that the appropriate risk assessments are done, that the management of risk is effective, the nature of the risk the businesses need to take in order to secure higher levels of hopefully sustainable growth are properly considered by the business. The second thing I would say is that, of course, there is much more regulation, much more scrutiny. You need to communicate much more effectively with your stakeholders and, of course, the investors who are increasingly demanding and looking for sustainable business plans, which the businesses need to ensure that they communicate much more effectively today than they did in the past. Well, one of the things that we've all been working on as CFOs is transforming the finance function. First of all, to make sure that we reduce the cost of the function and make it much more effective. And we're doing that, A, because businesses need to be more effective, but more importantly, to release resources from the finance function so they can be much more effective in partnering the business in terms of supporting the business in the development of the strategy and then, of course, the execution of the strategy. Now, a lot of that has involved shedding operations, outsourcing, which doesn't mean that you no longer have responsibility. It just means it's being done by somebody else. So that in itself brings a new challenge and a new skill set, because you've now got to manage an outsourced function that is still your responsibility but no longer under your immediate oversight and control. In terms of the strategy, clearly, the business leadership needs strong finance business partners. And something that we as finance professionals need to do is make sure that we bring much better insights from the external environment, bring them into the business so the business can understand what is happening out there, what are the trends, what are the changes, how can we preempt shifts in consumption patterns, in supply chain developments, and also make sure that we can understand the nature of the risk environment that is actually moving around all the time. I think that technology actually gives us a great opportunity to simplify the way businesses are run, particularly if we're now going to become much more multi-country, global in our nature, which means that we can get access to information much faster. Hopefully that gives us more opportunity to understand the nature of change that's taking place and use data analytics to explore and deep dive into the information to give the business much better insights. I actually think this is a big opportunity for the business, and the CIO as the Chief Information Officer and the CFO need to work collaboratively together to make sure the business has access to much better quality information, much faster, more real time, because that's the nature of the world we're moving into. Well, the talent agenda should, of course, be important for the business as a whole, and within the CFO function, it should be no different to that of the business. One of the things that I've discovered is that we need to make sure that the function has a great degree of diversity. Why? Because the businesses in which we operate, the customers that we serve, the consumers that we serve, the shareholders and stakeholders that are linked with us are becoming much more diverse than they were 20, 30 years ago. And therefore we need to reflect that degree of diversity right throughout the talent pool within the business. Now, specifically for finance, obviously the entry ticket is that you're a true finance professional. So you have to have competence, you have to have the right experience, that you've got to prove your capability through qualifications, etc. But beyond that, one of the roles that increasingly the CFOs and the finance leadership team play is a business partnering role right across the business, not just with the CEO, but also with other function leaders in the business. So ability to work collaboratively across the business, to understand the business, the details of the business, to be able to support financially right across all the functions, i.e. having finance professionals within the supply chain, within the HR function, within the procurement function, within the manufacturing function, within the sales function, is very important to work as a team, to bring good insights, to interpret what's going on, to give advice, and also, of course, to improve the communication capability of the business. These are the kind of skills which finance professionals need to develop in their careers, and that's something that I, as a CFO, and I expect my finance leadership team in the business to always continuously look to develop the capacity and capability of our finance professionals in the business.
So what we see in the external environment for CFOs and the businesses that they represent right now is, of course, huge amounts of volatility, first of all, and alongside that, huge amounts of sort of business uncertainty. And that really is creating quite an enormous amount of pressure on the finance function. And what the survey results show is that that pressure really manifests itself in two key areas. So first of all, there's really a focus on finance leaders to continue to bring a certain degree of fiscal constraint to the organisation. And what I mean by that is really cost reduction. But also, on the other hand, to make sure that it supports the business through more effective financial insight and financial forecasting to help the business navigate through these very difficult conditions and make the right sorts of decisions for the organisation in the long term. What's really interesting about the results from this survey is that there almost seems an inverse relationship between the most important priorities of the function and how effective finance leaders perceive the finance function to be in those areas. So if I think about some of the traditional finance areas of responsibility, like regulation, like tax, like investor relations, what we see from the survey is that the perception of effectiveness is very high, but it's just not such a huge priority for CFOs and other finance leaders right now. Conversely, those priorities that are considered to be very important, particularly around cost reduction, particularly around financial insight, financial forecasting, there is a sense that finance leaders believe the function to be slightly less effective. So I think that inverse relationship and that, if you like, differential between what the priorities are and the perception of effectiveness is actually a bit of a challenge for finance leaders right now. In terms of the challenges that finance leaders see, according to the survey, then there are really two standout issues that are facing CFOs at the moment. The first is around as the simple issue of there being too many priorities for the finance function and for finance leaders to deal with. So there's a real question about, well, how do I prioritise my time? And this is an issue that's come up just not on the survey that we've just ran, but also ACCA and IMA ran a number of high-profile CFO roundtables around the world recently. And the conclusion from those discussions was that time and managing time effectively and dealing with all those different priorities was a major challenge. So that's the first thing. It's a big challenge to manage all those priorities. Secondly, there seems to be an ongoing issue around IT. So poor IT and poor IT infrastructure was cited as one of the biggest challenges. And I think the frustration here is that, particularly for larger organisations, we're often in a situation where we're dealing with multiple finance and ERP systems. Finance function continues to undertake lots of manual workarounds to try and drive and generate the right number for the business. And rather than spending the time with the business explaining the implications of the number that that is presented, actually too much time is spent trying to get to the number in the first place, and that's a big that's a huge challenge for finance, because ultimately that's about how they win influence and reputation across the business. In terms of the skills that the survey suggests are most valued by finance leaders in the current environment, what we see is a blend of both the technical skills, but also complemented by some of those broader-based business capabilities that finance leaders need in this environment. So financial planning and analysis skills were highly rated, but alongside that we see skills and capabilities such as communication skills, influencing skills, as well as, importantly, finance leaders and CFOs bringing a very deep understanding both of the business in which they're operating, but also the broader business and industry environment as well. So really, it's about bringing together that broad complement of skills that's particularly needed in this environment right now, because it's so challenging. The survey considers what the most important stakeholders for CFOs and finance leaders are presently, and I think it's quite an interesting response. So what we see from the results is that some of the traditional stakeholder relationships are still deemed to be very important, particularly the auditors and the banking relationships. But also what we see, and this is a reflection really of how the CFO role and finance leader role has evolved, I think. What we do see is that more engagement is deemed important and a priority with stakeholder groups such as customers and suppliers. And if I think back to the priorities of the finance function that we talked about before, particularly the focus around cost reduction still, the focus around financial forecasting and business insight, it stands to reason that the finance function and finance leaders feel they need to be engaging with groups such as customers and suppliers, because really this is all about trying to help the business really drive and create value.